Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening from. My name is Eric, and this is the Five Head Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the 8th episode of the Five Head Podcast. My hate is not my fault. I feel like that's where we are in society, where we used to say it was wrong to be hateful of others, and now we justify our hate by blaming the people we hate for our hate. See, most people consider themselves good people and not hateful people. It's just that someone else is making them hateful. So we're going to dive into that kind of deeply here in this episode. And of course, this is all stemming from the big news of the last week or so, which is the murder of Charlie Kirk. We're going to talk a little bit about Charlie Kirk, some of the things he said, and the reactions from his murder. And as I always try to do, I'm going to try to talk about these things from the viewpoint of both people who liked Charlie Kirk and why, and people who didn't like Charlie Kirk and why. So if you're looking for an echo chamber for how you feel about Charlie Kirk, this isn't the episode for you. And that'll lead us to talking about the overall ideological divide in this country and the deeper it's gotten and the more violence it's led to in the 21st century. But first, before we get started, if you're new to listening to the podcast, please go back and check out episodes 1 through 7 on YouTube at Middleview Media and on Spotify and Buzzsprout at Five Head Podcast. And when you do, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps a brother out. All right, so it's really hard to talk about this Charlie Kirk thing because he's such a polarizing figure. And it's hard to criticize something he has said without coming off as you're someone on the left who is criticizing everything he says. And it's hard to defend something that he said or put it in context without people on the left assuming that you're just some right-wing blowhard that's trying to twist everything into some sort of support for Charlie Kirk. And I don't ever aim to do that. And it's funny when listening to Charlie Kirk or his equivalent on the left, like a Harry Sisson or something like that, I realize like they're very much ideologues. They're trying to convince people of what they believe is right and wrong. And that's people who become big in whatever movement they're in. But that's not what I aim to do in my podcast or even when I talk politics with people. I'm not an ideologue. I simply like analyzing what happened, number one, why it happened, number two, and how people feel about it and why they feel the way they do about it. Why is it Charlie Kirk can say something and some people are like, that makes sense, and some people are like, that's completely racist. So when I talk politics, I'm not trying to convince anyone who might be listening that this is the right way to feel about something and people with a different of opinion than me is wrong in any way. I genuinely like talking about things that are going on from the perspective of both sides. I like to understand why one side feels one way and the other side feels the other. And when I say understand, I don't just mean I want to hear what they say. I mean, I want to put myself in their shoes and bring up legit concerns or feelings or arguments that they make. And it seems when I talk to people, most people are either staunch one side or the other of any issue. Not just staunch Republican or Democrat, but just any issue, they have a feeling about it. There's usually a clear line between people who feel one way or another way about something. And when I talk to those people, I find myself playing devil's advocate because I'm just trying to bring up the other viewpoint of it. And people get so mad. I'm doing that because I think it's good. I don't think anyone on either side of any issue is crazy or stupid or any of that stuff. They see it differently, and it's coming from a completely different perspective. And we should be able to identify that, and we should be able to not let people feel like their perspective and their view is not legitimate, even if we disagree with it. So it's hard to talk about something like what happened with Charlie Kirk because you can't do that without talking about Charlie Kirk. And he's such a polarized figure that when talking about him, you're going to drum up all kinds of emotions from people who both liked Charlie Kirk in some capacity or people who hated Charlie Kirk in some capacity. But either way, whether you like someone or you don't like someone that becomes popular in politics, there's two things that always happen. Number one, people that support that person in their general sentiments, they're going to play mental gymnastics to try to make sure that anything that person says doesn't come off as bad as it might sound to someone else. If you're a Trump supporter, you can disagree with something Trump does, but you'll still find a way to defend it to not come off as someone who is turning on Trump. For some reason, we feel like once we choose something that we remain completely loyal to it. And the other thing that happens is when someone doesn't like this person that's become famous, especially in a political capacity, then every single thing that person says gets twisted into something extremely negative. And if you don't know who someone that is a political figure is, and you're on the left or you're on the right, and someone brings them up, the minute the person that's bringing them up says, yes, they're a left-wing XYZ or they are a right-wing XYZ, depending on where you stand internally, you're automatically going to go into listening about that person, to hearing what this other person has to say about that person, with the viewpoint of they're on the same side of me, so they're probably correct in what they're saying, or they're on the opposite side of me, so I guarantee everything they're saying is the most worst thing in the world. And before you even hear what they say, you're going into listening to them from that vantage point. And I think I upset people when I talk to them about politics because I don't start from that vantage point. When someone says, look what this politician is proposing, right? So a politician proposes some sort of legislation. I don't look at it as that person is a Democrat or that person is a Republican, so they're probably trying to do XYZ with it. And that XYZ they're trying to do is something negative. I would never ever say, I'm a Democrat, so if this Republican is proposing something, it's obviously to attack some group, right? And I would never say, I'm a Republican, so if this Democrat is proposing something, it's obviously proposing something to take some big government control of something. When something is proposed by a politician, for this example, I honestly, truly look at what is being proposed for the sake of what is being proposed. What does the legislation say? What can I deduce from what this legislation says will happen? And then, why are we proposing this legislation? What would be the need for this legislation? That's how I develop the intent of the legislation. And plus, like you've heard me say in other episodes, there are pros and cons to everything. So I'm going to look at what are some of the pros of this legislation and what are some of the cons. And both of those things are going to come to fruition. And then I'm going to decide if the pros outweigh the cons. And that will be whether or not I support a piece of legislation. But most people, if you're on the right and the piece of legislation is proposed by someone on the left, you're starting from the vantage point of, I oppose this legislation unless there's something in there that can change my mind. And if you're on the left and someone on the right proposes legislation, you're automatically opposing it unless there's something in there that can change your mind. But like I said a couple minutes ago, when you start with this idea that I'm on the left or right, so everyone on the opposite side, when they say something, I know it's automatically going to be negative in comparison to my viewpoint, then you're not open to then having your mind changed about that. So basically what it comes down to, and we see this is why Congress is so split, and the Congress is flipping every 2 years, and the presidency is flipping every 4 years. And what it comes down to is when something is proposed by one party, it's automatically just rejected by the other party. The same kind of framework gets applied to everything when it comes to politics. So when you have a political figure that's podcasting like Charlie Kirk did and putting out his ideology, the same thing with a proposed legislation between Democrats and Republicans in our leadership happens with our Democrat and Republican voters. If Charlie Kirk talks about something and you are on the left and you know Charlie Kirk is a conservative, you're automatically starting from a standpoint before even hearing what he has to say that whatever he's going to say is going to be wrong, and it's going to be extreme, and it's going to be racist, and it's going to be sexist, it's going to be homophobic before he even says anything. And then when you start with that vantage point, what's happening is everything he does say, you're going to try to twist into one of those preconceived intents of his speaking, whether it's to be racist, to demonize people of color, to dehumanize gays or trans folks. So you're automatically looking at it from, he's going to say something like this, so you're going to automatically try to twist everything he says into that. It's just psychology. And on the other side of it, it's the same thing. If Charlie Kirk's about to say something, he's about to give a 2-minute speech, you're automatically looking at it from, well, I'm a conservative, he's a conservative, this is going to be good. What he's going to say is going to be accurate. What he's going to say is really going to highlight the things that we need to be talking about here. And anyone who's going to take what he's about to say as racist or homophobic or whatever is wrong. And then that's where the arguments between the two sides about Charlie Kirk even start from the get-go. And if you're having a debate about Charlie Kirk today, you're both already starting from the vantage point of either what he said is generally correct, what he said is generally hateful. And you're not able to change anyone's mind, not based on the explanation after the one-liner, because they're already starting from that point of this is going to be A or this is going to be B. And as he's talking or as they're hearing what he's saying, they're automatically applying it to their viewpoint of Charlie Kirk, if that makes sense. And it's not just Charlie Kirk. It's anyone that we listen to talking. It's really hard to kind of go through what he has said and try to question how people feel about what he said, because no matter what you try to explain, they'll roll your eyes and say, oh my gosh, you're trying to spin it in some way, or you're just being ridiculous and you're trying to turn everything he said into something completely negative. So I want to try to talk about some of the things that he said from both the vantage point of people who take it as something negative or racist or homophobic, and from the vantage point of people who, when listening to the full context, will try to argue it wasn't being racist or homophobic at all. And that's very hard to do, but I'm going to attempt to do it. Because what I realized is when talking to people who are on either side of what Charlie Kirk had to say, it's not unfair to take something that he said as homophobic or racist, even if you try to listen to the context of how he's saying it or what he's specifically talking about. Because people like Charlie Kirk, they don't make their worth of $50 million by being moderate and by trying to talk about the subject they're talking about without offending anyone. And it's kind of the opposite. You have to be bold and make a statement that is going to end up a one-liner quote that everyone debates, and that's how you become known. I'm not going to be famous for my podcast because I won't do that. I'm not going to give one-liners to try to stir the pot and try to offend someone in order to spark a conversation, because I genuinely don't want to offend anybody. But people like Charlie Kirk and his equivalents on the left and the right that have these ideological discussions, which are a good thing. We should talk about the hard, controversial things, but they'll purposely be bold in a statement because it drives views. It also drives the discussion, yes, and that's a good thing, but it drives clicks and likes and views. And the only way you earn a living talking like this is by doing that. And it's funny because it's easy to be conflicted when discussing the things that someone says, like what Charlie Kirk says. Because when he's quoted as a one-liner, gay people should be stoned, it's very easy to be like, that's vile and offensive. And then once you hear that one-liner and you hear people repeating it over and over again, when someone says, you do understand that wasn't the context. He wasn't saying people need to be stoned to death. There was a woman he was debating with or having this conversation with, and she claimed the true word of God is Leviticus. And he was saying, are you sure it's Leviticus? Because this true word of God in Leviticus has a passage that says gay people should be stoned to death. So he was calling out the fact that this person and people in general will cherry pick Bible verses. So in this particular situation, so someone sees a headline that says Charlie Kirk said gay people should be stoned, and they are Democrat, and they know Charlie Kirk is a conservative, and they've already seen people claim that he's racist, he's homophobic, he hates trans people. So they see this quote and they're like, geez, of course he did. Of course he did. But then when you try to say yes, but in context, he was literally calling out the other person for referencing that Bible as the word of God, when it's that Bible who says gay people should be stoned to death. As you're explaining that, they're shaking their head like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the context was, but it does matter what the context is. Because he's never once said gay people should be killed or stoned to death. He's actually argued against extreme religious people who are against homosexuality. I mean, he actually said that in Christianity, gays are welcome. But once someone already has this negative view, you ignore everything else because you already made up your mind. And you're just not willing to hear anything else that can change your mind. And I get it. If I heard someone say gay people should be stoned to death, to me, that's a vile thing to say. But I don't hear or see someone post a quote that says, this person said gay people should be stoned to death, and automatically think, oh my gosh, that person wants people to be stoned to death. Did they actually say that? It's like I could be talking about a video game, and in the video game, there's different color codings in the game, whether you're winning or losing or whatever. And someone could be explaining to me, now when you see this, if you have this bubble here and it starts turning black, that's bad, whether it means you're losing or you're out of place in the game or whatever. Someone could edit that and say, Fivehead said black is bad. When I didn't really say black was bad, we're talking in context of a video game. And I know that that's a terrible example or an easy example for context. But you would think when people accuse Charlie Kirk of saying gay people should be stoned to death, you would think that the context around that would make it easy for you to say, okay, he didn't say gay people should be stoned to death. So the context in my video game reference is very easy to understand, but so is the context with the stoning gay people to death. That's also very easy to understand that quote was taken way out of context and he didn't actually say that. But for people who just hate Charlie Kirk because they know he's a conservative talking head, that simple context is ignored. And people will cherry pick what they want to listen to or hear to determine whether or not they like someone. So like, I don't need context, listen to his words. Well, what about his words that says he has no hate for people who are transgender? He has no hate for people who are gay, that he believes marriage is between a man and a woman. That's his belief, but he understands that people don't share the same belief as him when it comes to marriage, and that's perfectly okay. He has no hate for people who don't follow the same scripture or belief that he does. So they say, listen to his words. He said stoned gay people to death. But then when you say, okay, well then listen to his words, he says he has no hate in his heart for people that are different than he is. He perfectly understands not everyone follows the same scripture that he does, and he perfectly accepts people for not having the same view, whether it's religious view, marriage view, transgender view, as he does. Those are his actual words. When you're criticizing someone you don't like, you say, I just have to listen to what they say. And then when someone says, okay, well, here's something they said that goes against how you feel about them, I'm not listening to that. Do you get what I mean? And now I know how this is going right now. This is coming off as I'm defending Charlie Kirk, and I'm not defending Charlie Kirk. He talked about controversial subjects purposefully, which is not a bad thing, but he clearly did it in a way to make sure it's fitting the support he gets from conservatives because he's a conservative, and without care if what he said is going to have any offense taken to it. It's a way of starting conversations. I'm going to say something bold. If you're offended by it, let's talk about it. And then when he gets into the descriptions and explanations of what he meant by that statement around the subject that he's talking about, that's when he'll backtrack a bit. That is a technique in having these types of conversations. And when you have that kind of technique, when you say something bold to drum up people's emotion in order to get the conversation going, you're going to offend people. And people have a right to be offended. And people have a right to not like that you said that. You purposely say something that you know is going to offend people, especially in this world, as we just talked about, where people will clip just what you said and make a headline of it. You know that's going to happen, especially when you're a figure like Charlie Kirk who has a platform. So you do that on purpose, and it's going to anger people who then are going to jump on and want to question you and comment on you and yell at you and scream at you. But then you've got them at the table, and now you can start having the conversation. So he did this a lot when talking about DEI and race relations. He's made some pretty bold statements that offended people in order to then have the discussion with them about it all, where then in that discussion, he'll say, no, of course I don't think this. Of course I don't think that. And I just feel like when you do that, you have to understand that people are not going to like you for it. It's going to upset people. So when you make the comment, when I get on a plane and I see a black pilot, I don't know if we're going to be safe or not. Do you think people of color are going to look at that and go, whoa, that's a loving, caring thing to say. That's a discussion we should have about how you should be scared if you get on a plane and there's a black pilot. That is overtly offensive. It's purposefully obtuse. It's trying to elicit anger from people who want to debate what he's saying about DEI in order to get them to the table to debate it. But then as soon as someone who takes that as a racist comment calls him racist for it, he's like, whoa, 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 I'm not being racist. I'm saying, and then he goes into his explanation about DEI policies. But you have to understand, even if you think in context he's making a point, when you start it with a bold statement that's meant to drum up emotions, you're going to drum up emotions. And you can't tell someone they're not allowed to take offense to something that Charlie Kirk said. You can't tell someone that they're not allowed to hear what Charlie Kirk says and not believe he's racist. Okay, so let me do it this way. Let's say you find someone that has never heard of or never listened to anything that Charlie Kirk has ever said. And you play them a clip of Charlie Kirk giving his argument that DEI, from a policy perspective, can lead to divisiveness and regression in overall equality for diversity, equity, and inclusion. That person could listen to his argument on that because Charlie Kirk, when he got past the big, bold statements and the one-liners and started to explain why he feels a certain way, is really good at making his argument. Even if they don't agree that DEI policy could lead to some sort of divisiveness or a regression in equality, they could at least understand that someone has an argument for both the pros and the cons that come with implementing DEI policy. And at the very least, probably wouldn't say that everything Charlie Kirk explained was racist. However, when you start the entire conversation with a statement about a black pilot, even if it's just a joke, with an insulting joke about a black pilot, then it can make Charlie Kirk's overall standpoint on DEI come off as racist. And people who defend Charlie Kirk will say, but that's not fair because it's subjective. If you listen to the context of what he was saying, it has nothing to do with the little joke he made about seeing a black pilot and not feeling safe being on the plane. Yes, but if you believe in subjectivity, then you have to understand that subjectively, someone else could take that joke about a black pilot as racist. As a matter of fact, many people would argue that if you're about to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as an idea and or as some sort of policy implementation, and the first thing you think of is to come up with a black joke, that is racist in itself. Like for me personally, if I was going to sit down on another podcast and talk with someone about DEI, it wouldn't occur to me to make a black joke before I did that. So that comment or that joke, whatever he intended that to be, didn't add any value to the conversation he was having while trying to explain that implementation of DEI policy has both pros and cons. It just didn't add anything of value to that. But subjectively, someone could hear just that one line, that one joke, if you will, and think it's just racist to even come up with that joke, especially in the context of having a serious conversation about DEI. And you cannot tell me that Charlie Kirk didn't understand the difference. Now, does that mean Charlie Kirk overall is racist? Like he's deep down, by the pure definition of racism, not liking someone that's a different skin color than you? Does that mean because he made that joke about a pilot and not trusting because of their skin color, does that mean he's actually racist? Not necessarily. And when people defending Charlie Kirk argue you've got to listen to the context of what he's saying, they're focusing on the explanation clip of why Charlie Kirk thinks implementation of DEI policy could be divisive or regressive. And people who believe Charlie Kirk is racist are not saying he's racist for discussing the pros and the cons of DEI policy implementation. They're saying the joke he made about a black pilot is racist. You can't tell me Charlie Kirk doesn't understand subjectivity and the difference between discussing the pros and cons of DEI policy and making an insulting black joke. Now again, when you're trying to make money off of speaking, you get more clicks, more likes, more shares, more views. You become more viral when you make those big, bold statements, even if you try to write it off as a joke. Even if deep down you don't feel that way and you want to get to the meat of the debate, which is talking about the pros and cons of DEI policy, you know subjectively someone's going to take your little joke as a racist comment. And that's what's going to lead to when you try to sit down at a college campus and have discussion with people who walk up, people walking up immediately with this idea that you're racist and now they're combating you instead of having a discussion. But you also know that that's how you go viral, and that's how you earn money for doing what you do. So he knows the difference in that. These people who become famous for doing what I'm doing right this second are not dumb. They know what they're doing. And everyone believes that their intentions are good and makes excuses when they say something that offends somebody else. If you really want someone to hear your explanation on something, then you have to tone down your one-liner, because that one-liner is going to trigger some emotions that will block people from being able to even listen to what your explanation of it is. So an example of that would be when he said the Civil Rights Act needs to be overturned. That's a crazy statement in itself. The Civil Rights Act should never been signed and it needs to be overturned. There's no way you can make a statement like that and not realize that people are going to take it for what it sounds like. Because what he meant on that was discrimination against people of color should be a one-page bill. He actually said the point of the Civil Rights Act is good to make sure that people of color are not being discriminated because of their skin color. But his point in saying the Civil Rights Act needs to be thrown out is it's too broad. So his explanation of it was it's too broad and now it's being used for things that aren't civil rights violations. That's all he meant, is it needs to be more well defined because people are taking advantage of it. When you don't like Charlie Kirk and you hear him say the Civil Rights Act should have never been signed, we need to do away with the Civil Rights Act, of course that's upsetting, because the intent of the Civil Rights Act was to make sure people of color aren't discriminated against, and now this person is saying we should remove the Civil Rights Act. That is a bold statement, especially coming from a white guy. That comes off as a very racist statement. And he knew it would come off as a racist statement. So it shouldn't surprise people when people who have heard those statements believe he's a racist. And there's no arguing against that. If you feel someone is racist, no one can tell you you're wrong for how you feel. And if you feel someone is not racist, no one can tell you that you're wrong for not seeing them as a racist. And when Charlie would start off with something like that bold statement, it's hard to come back from that. So instead of saying the Civil Rights Act should have never happened and needs to be repealed, he should have started the discussion of what he was trying to get to with something like, people are using the broadness of the Civil Rights Act to take something that they're offended by and claim it's a violation of their civil rights. Then you're having a discussion about what it is you wanted to have a discussion about, which is people taking advantage of legislation to go after people. And it's the same thing with any kind of transgender discussion. I think it's good to have discussions about transgenderism. I think it's good to have discussions about religion. I think it's okay for people to believe you can't change the way that you were born. I also think it's okay for people to believe you absolutely can change the way you were born. But if you start off the discussion with transgenderism is a mental illness, no one who supports the idea of transgenderism is going to want to hear anything you say about transgenderism. Even if you believe transgenderism is a mental illness, the minute you start with what a large swath of people would generally consider to be insulting, or what a large swath of people would generally consider to be a racist statement in itself, you're not going to get people that want to open their mind and hear what you have to say about it. You're only going to get people that want to combat you on it. Not only will they only want to combat you on it, but they're going to start from a vantage point of now they hate you because of what you said. And when someone dislikes you, it's very hard to try to convince them to see your point of view. So here's another example. And this is a really good example to my point. And when I go through this example, if I have someone listening that's a Democrat, they're going to be yelling through the speakers at me. If I have someone listening that is a Republican, they are going to be yelling through the speakers at me as well. Because this goes back to everything that I'm trying to say about how when trying to make a point, the way you say something and what you're inferring when you say it really does matter. But in this example, this also goes to how things get twisted about what is said. And by believing what was twisted or misquoted as being said is then used in people's minds as a way to say, yes, maybe it wasn't exactly that, but we knew what he was inferring. So now we're adding context to what someone says in order to help solidify our view of what they said and therefore the type of person that they are. And again, this all just goes back to when you do it this way, it's because you're trying to get a reaction. That's what gets you the likes, the clicks, and the views, and essentially the money so you can continue to do what you're doing, which is trying to elicit discussions between two different ideologies. Anyway, so let's go through this example because this is a big one and it's had follow-on effect and argument due to the result of this example being quoted. So Karen Attiah is a Washington Post columnist. She was fired for putting out a tweet on Blue Sky Social. The tweet is just a quote from Charlie Kirk. The quote says, quote, "Black women do not have the brain processing power to be taken seriously. You have to go steal a white person's slot." End quote, dash Charlie Kirk. So that was her tweet on Blue Sky Social. And she got fired for that from the Washington Post. And I don't agree that Karen should have been fired for posting this quote. However, she kind of misquoted him. And that's what we're going to get to. But first, when it comes to free speech, if a company doesn't feel like you hold the same values as they do, they can let you go for that. Most companies are hire and fire at will. So yeah, if you say something on social media that doesn't meet that company's values or ethics or whatever they believe in, then you could be fired for that. There are plenty of companies out there that would have never hired Charlie Kirk or would have fired him for the things that he has said. So it's not anti-free speech when you lose your job for the things you do outside of work. But I digress. Let's get back to this quote. The reason why she was fired is because she misquoted what Charlie Kirk said. And it's a very important thing, especially for a journalist, to not misquote what someone says, especially because as a journalist, you have a platform that's going to reach a lot of people and it could sway the way people feel about something. I mean, that's what journalism is. You're telling a story about something, right? So again, the quote she tweeted was, "Black women do not have the brain processing power to be taken seriously. You have to go steal a white person's slot." End quote. Charlie Kirk didn't say that. So here's where I'm going to upset the people that hate Charlie Kirk, because they're going to say, "Oh, you're arguing semantics." Fair, but he didn't say that. His actual quote was, "Yeah, we know you do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to be taken somewhat seriously." Now, he was specifically talking about Joy Reid, Michelle Obama, Sheila Jackson, and SCOTUS Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. So he wasn't saying black women don't have brain processing power to be taken seriously. He was saying these specific four people don't have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken seriously. And he was saying that in the context of DEI, which is a very controversial subject between the left and the right. It's very hard to mention it or talk about it to anyone without the anger based on their ideological opinion coming from the left or right on DEI as a whole. So I'm not trying to anger anyone who supports or is against DEI. I'm not going to argue DEI in the way Charlie Kirk tries to argue it against people who support it. I'm saying in the context of this discussion, he is against the idea of DEI. And these four people that he was talking about in this context have all said they are a product of DEI. And of course, when they said they were a product of DEI, they are talking about the goodness and the opportunity that being DEI aware and having DEI programs presents for people of color, because that's their take on it. His take has always been DEI means someone could be hired if they're not fully qualified in order to meet DEI quotas, right? That's his take. It's not my take. I'm saying that was his take on it. And these four people have both either said or inferred that they themselves are a product of DEI. That if it wasn't for DEI awareness, they wouldn't have their job. And in their explanation of it, they would have been discriminated against because of their race. So he's talking about these four individuals specifically. That is a major difference than saying black women don't have the brain processing power to be taken seriously. If I witness a murder and the murderer is a black guy, and I said, this guy is a murderer, that is completely different than if I said black guys are murderers, right? It's completely different. I'm talking about a specific person who did the act of which I'm describing them as. That's completely different than painting all black men as murderers. And that's what Karen at the Washington Post did. She quoted him as saying, "Black women do not have the brain processing power to be taken seriously," as a direct quote. And he didn't say that. That is a lot worse to say all black women don't have the brain processing power to be taken seriously than singling out 4 people that you adamantly disagree with, and so you're insulting those 4 people. You have to be able to see the difference in that. At the same time, for people who are defending what Charlie Kirk actually said, you have to understand how that can be taken by people who are black. You have to understand how that can be taken in general. You have to understand that people can take that as a racist thing to say. You just happen to be talking about 4 black women who have made it to very high positions in their field and making the accusation that they had to steal a white person's slot in order to get where they are because they don't have the brain processing power. You can understand how someone could infer that that's how he feels about black people in general, or at least black women in general. And this is what I was talking about, using bold statements like this in order to get clicks and likes and views. He knew what he was doing. He is not stupid. So he had to have known he was going to be called racist for the things he said. He was going to be called homophobic for the things that he said. He had to have known that the things that he said were going to be taken with offense. So I can understand why someone like Karen would take offense to the actual quote, and why she would infer that he's basically saying this is how he feels about black women. It's not an illogical leap to make. But at the end of the day, it was a misquote, and the Washington Post decided to let her go. Now, I'm not going to go into every single thing Charlie Kirk has ever said and try to label him as a racist, sexist, or homophobe, or try to dig into the context of everything he said to try to prove he's not racist, sexist, or a homophobe. There's plenty of information on Charlie Kirk. There's plenty of opinions on Charlie Kirk out there, and all of his content is out there. I would just suggest that everyone understand when someone posts their opinion about Charlie Kirk on some sort of social media, they're coming from the viewpoint of they liked and agreed with him, or they hate and disagreed with him. And everything that they post is going to be done in a way to try to justify their like for him or their hatred for him. So everything you see on Charlie Kirk posted by someone else is going to come with bias. In a general sense, every single person in the country right now either supports what Charlie Kirk was doing and saying, or doesn't. And I don't think that anyone's going to change their mind on that. I don't think that the people fighting each other on social media over what Charlie Kirk said helps anything. I think the ideological discussions that people have are surrounding all of our social topics. I think that's a good thing to do from both sides. So I don't think everything Charlie Kirk said was a good thing, but I think what he was doing was a good thing. Getting out in front of people and having the discussion and posting it on the internet so everyone could see it and everyone can have the discussion. And what's funny is, like, I've never followed Charlie Kirk. Like, I guess he was at turning point. I don't subscribe to really any left or right media or website, whatever. But like, I knew who Charlie Kirk was. And usually that's because, like, your friends will send you a video clip that's like, Charlie Kirk owns a college student, or college student completely owns Charlie Kirk. And you listen to it and you listen to the back and forth. And over time, as you see more and more of those clips, you get an understanding of who Charlie Kirk is and what he stood for and what he was trying to talk about, and also what the opposition view was. So I think those things are good. I think more people need to do that. He's a right-wing influencer, but there's plenty of left-wing influencers too. And they do the same thing on the basis of their viewpoints and their ideology. And I think all of that is a good thing. I think discussion is the key. I think disagreement is absolutely imperative. I think we all need to disagree. If everyone thought the exact same, it would be terrible, in my opinion. But I do think we should all try to talk to the people who feel differently than you do about Charlie Kirk himself without accusing them of being racist and homophobic because they agree with the deeper meaning of what he said or the context that he said, and without accusing them that they are just hating on him because he's a conservative and they don't want to accept his ideology. They don't want to accept him for being conservative when they really do feel some of the comments that he said were racist and homophobic. And I think we should not let this silence having those conversations. Transgenderism is a big thing right now. It's big for people who are against it. It's big for more and more people now who are identifying as it. And I think the only way we get on the same page of stuff and the only way that we learn to coexist is to talk about it, is to understand that people feel differently about it than you do, and that's okay. And that's where we kind of get into like this idea that my hatred is not my fault. Someone else makes me hateful. Because even just in my lifetime, and I'm 42 years old, political ideology has completely taken over everyone's lives. Everything is based on politics now. When you're having a conversation with people, you're trying to figure out where they stand politically to help determine what kind of person they are. And the reason why I know this is because when you're privately with someone that you are close with, your spouse, a family member, a close neighbor, and you both just interacted with a stranger. Maybe you were at a park with your kids and we were having all these just random conversations while the kid plays. When you go back to your comfort zone with your significant other, you talk about that person and what they said. When you're having the conversation with that person, you're smiling, and then when you get back, you're like, can you believe this person said XYZ? Like, that's all revolved around politics. You can tell what kind of person they are. You can tell they probably have a Ukraine flag outside their house. You can tell they probably have a "Don't Tread on Me" flag outside their house, right? It's gotten so ingrained as a daily part of our lives that everything is now argued from an ideological standpoint. Like, you can automatically find fault in anyone if you first find out that they are ideologically different than you are, or ideologically opposite than you are. We went moving from it's okay for people to have difference of opinion to both sides being brainwashed that it's not actually okay to have a difference of opinion about XYZ because that's hateful. And what this has led to now is more actual hatred expressed between people in society. It's not anymore, this person is politically opposite than me. It's this person is a POS human being. So an example of that is if somebody feels the government should pool our money together, so tax us, to provide free healthcare to everybody. There are legit arguments on both sides of that idea. Someone who's against that used to, in my lifetime, say, I respect that you feel that way, but I don't think that's a great idea. And they would just have the discussion. But now, that's because you are a POS human being that thinks the government should just take all the money that we get out of our paycheck, and you're trying to force communism and socialism onto everyone else, which history has proven doesn't work. And the fact that you want socialism makes me think you are a POS human being. And then the same the other way around. If someone says, you can do what you want, I just don't believe someone who was born male can be a woman, then it's the other person, instead of saying, okay, I respect your thought on that. It's no, you're a POS human being. You just want to dehumanize and attack trans people because you're a POS human being. Do you see what I mean? And like I've said many times, neither side is wrong. You're not wrong if the things that Charlie Kirk said offended you. You're also not wrong to call out things that Charlie Kirk said that are misquoted or out of context or flat out not true. And people are fighting over this, like hardcore. There's more people upset with and talking about Charlie Kirk being murdered than there are people who talk about school shootings when they happen. As a matter of fact, the day Charlie Kirk was murdered and the very next day, when this was all still fresh with his murder, there were 3 school shootings. You heard nothing about that, almost nothing about it. When I turn on social media, it's all about Charlie Kirk. It's all about people arguing whether or not someone else's opinion of him is true or not. And then you have, on a political perspective, you have both sides of people trying to make the claim that they're the good side, the other side is the violent rhetoric side. No one is saying my side needs to stop. That's what it really comes down to. Everyone gives this stupid, generic, political violence in this country is never the answer. Same people who are saying this are then spending the entire day finding something that someone specifically on the other side said that fits extreme rhetoric or politically violent speech and calling them out for it. No one yet has said everyone needs to tone it down. In fact, here's someone on my side here's what they said, and I think it's wrong, and they shouldn't say that. Because we're not trying to tone it down. We're trying to prove that we're the good guys. It's the other side that's bad. And it's funny because in both sides trying to prove that, all I've seen is just vile, divisive, hateful rhetoric by people on both sides being shared by the other side in order to prove that it's the other side that is the one that is mostly violent. And it's like, I don't even know some of these divisive tweets and posts and comments existed in the quantities that they do from both sides. It's unbelievable to me because I'm still in this mindset. Like, my neighbor and I could have just a staunch disagreement on something. And it's cool because we're neighbors, and it's cool that we have disagreements. It's diversity. You are different than me. I like that. I champion that. Meanwhile, there's people online every single day, and we're seeing more and more of it because people are trying to prove the other side is worse. Just absolutely just vile. Calling for deaths, calling for violence. It's unbelievable to me. Over ideological differences. Politics is the main dividing line in this country right now. Gender, sex, religion, race, all that stuff is second to politics. You don't hate gay people, you hate gay liberals. You don't hate religious people, you hate religious conservatives, etc. That is the main dividing line in this country right this second. This goes both ways, but because we're on the topic of Charlie Kirk, I'll say it using Charlie Kirk as an example. If you hate Charlie Kirk, the faulted human being like the rest of us that is Charlie Kirk, you only hate him because he's a conservative and you're not. If you hate Joe Biden, if you hate Hillary Clinton, it's only because they are a Democrat and you're not. Everything else, they're racist, they're a communist, they're a socialist, they're homophobic, transphobic, is everything you try to convince yourself of those people so that you can absolve yourself of the hatred you have for those people. So that the hatred you have for those people are the fault of those people. Because my hate is not my fault. It's their fault. Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you haven't listened to episodes 1 through 7, give them a try. Let me know what you think. If there's anything you want me to talk about, anything you want to hear my perspective on, anything that you want to tell me I'm an idiot for, anything you want to debate, put it in the comments or email me at eric.middleviewmedia@gmail.com, and I'll address it in the next episode of the podcast. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye, head out.